Present.
Lauren,
Here.
Ian,
Present.
and Ben, present. And any agenda changes, requests, or deletions? Not a thing.
No.
No oral communications? Oh, should we have waived?
We did.
Okay. No oral communications, and let's have an approval of the minutes of November 21st. Have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll second that motion, not emotion.
Great song.
And second?
I did just second.
Oh, second, okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, all those in, any changes or deletions to the minutes?
No.
Hey, all those in favor?
Aye.
Oppose, abstain, one abstention.
Wait, who abstained?
He was
I wasn't here.
present.
Okay,
I wasn't here at the meeting.
okay, we can bring them back to the next one.
Oh, that's right, we need,
Yep.
Okay.
okay.
Staff comments?
So the biggest news, I just came directly from the site, it's day one. There's Barbara Gregudis on the site at 1050 Page Mill. And here we are lifting the first piece in. So we're installing 4 of the 5 sculptures today and tomorrow, and hopefully finish those tomorrow. And then the 5th one will go in January 7th. And yeah, so that was taken just half an hour ago. Still have my boots on and my hard hat in the car. But exciting stuff to see these pieces finally arriving on site. Frequencies was the first, here's the rendering, was the first public art and private development project that was reviewed by the commission and approved. And so we're excited to see those finally come in. And what you're looking at, the artwork that was installed today is the one that's kind of in the middle. So, so that's really exciting. And the green light is happening too. So the lights will start going on, I believe, in January sometime.
That's exciting. Thank you.
That it for staff comments?
That's all I have on my mind right now. Whatever else might have been there's gone.
All right. Moving on to action items. The first one is allocation of funds for Corridor 2. And the staff recommends that the Public Art Commission allocate the funds of $41,000 for an anchor installation by MARPI for Corridor 2.
Thank you. So just to revisit, Code Art 2 coming up in October, the first weekend in October 2020. It's not actually that far away. And so we had put out a call for the anchor installation, which is intended to be a destination piece, eye-catching, really bringing people to the festival. And so this is just sort of summarizing. So we are looking at one major artwork up to 8 urban interventions with some prototyping workshops and open houses so that we can hopefully get more people involved and engaged in these projects as they move forward. I feel like I'm really loud. Unfortunately, we did not receive NEA funding this year, which we were completely disappointed by, but that's just happens, and you have different panels every time, and so you never know. But it does mean that it's going to be a heavier lift as far as fundraising and or allocations from the city for supporting the urban interventions. So the selection process for the anchor artwork, we went through some of this when I gave you an update, I think just last month. So the last time we met, the 3 finalists were selected to put together a conceptual proposal for Code Art 2. And so the one that we here's the selection criteria. So Palo Alto was the proposal by MARPE, and MARPE is a Polish-born artist based in San Francisco, collaborates with teams to create these kinds of installations and special, not special events, but installations and exhibits. And so quite a few of the artworks that were reviewed via the panel are interactive in some way. Many were cited indoors, but not all completely. And so MARPE, instead of looking forward, decided to look back and base the forms that would come out in the artwork on these crinoids, which would have been underwater. When Palo Alto was underwater, I believe that time would have been, it was like 45 billion years ago. I had to look it up. But these interesting creatures are more like animals. So they can actually detach and walk along the ocean floor. And they think of it almost like a starfish in that those arms can break off and regrow. So these just sort of fascinating creatures that he sort of decided to base the artwork off of. So we don't have final artwork for what it's going to look like, except for the opening slide, and these are the basis for the forms. But I'm going to walk you through a couple of other examples of the types of things MARPE is imagining playing out on a 13-foot wide, 9-foot tall video screen. That would be in Lytton Plaza. And it would have motion interaction. So up to 6 people can interact with it at a time, and it's possible it may work on both facades. So you could have 12 people at a time, so it would be two-faced. This is an example of an online component that could be part of the project as well. This is existing. You can pull it up on your phone, and as you tap on the different parts of the creature, it moves and rotates. So part of the proposal was that they would have some sort of mobile application with it as well, but no one needs a mobile device to interact with the wall. It would track you and interact with you and respond to your form on the screen. And this is an example, so this is not the form, but this is something that's sort of similar, and that you see this one had a connect to at the bottom. There's a user avatar sort of obscured, and the piece responds to that person. So that's what MARPE is proposing for this, that those crinoid forms would react and respond to people interacting with the wall. And this gives you just a sense of how it might look in the day, so it would be much brighter, and then at night it would be a little more muted, so it's not blowing you out with this bright white light. So it would shift as the sun set and it became more lively. So that would also give it more visibility and ensure that people want to come back and visit it when it sort of has different behaviors over the course of the day. Is that it? That we have? So again, this would be a 13-foot wide, 9-foot tall screen. And they're imagining it would go in Lytton Plaza, sort of parallel with the kitty corner of the fountain, so that people between that bench of the fountain and the wall could interact with it, and then people on the further interior into Lytton Plaza would also interact with it if we're able to make it double-sided. So those are things that will have to be worked out as it develops. Unfortunately, Commissioner Ross is unable to attend. She had something come up at the last minute, but she was part of that selection panel, as was Kristen O'Kane, CSD Director. We had someone from Institute from the Future. We had new media artist Anya Ohlfeld, Stanford Arts representative Ellen O, and the curator from the Art Center, Selene Foster, also. So it was a really great panel, and after they reviewed all the finalist submissions, this was the unanimous winner. Everybody just hands down, it was everyone's first choice, which is really unusual because I'm used to there being a little more heated debate on something like this, and this was the unanimous winner. So we're really excited to bring this to you this evening for Code Art 2.
Any questions or comments?
Where do we get where does it come from in the budget, the 41K?
It would come out of the temporary public art budget.
Great, and how long will this be up? Just for the weekend of Code Art 2?
For the 72 hours of Code Art 2. Clearly, we would have to supply security for it. There was a request from the panelists that perhaps we could explore it moving indoors somewhere, which we can certainly look for those opportunities, but the intent is that you bring people for the festival for the 72 hours. So it's probably just going to be on the plaza, but we'll keep our eyes open for opportunities.
I love the location of it. I think that is great because it gets a lot of traffic there. And I just think it's, I mean, what a creative person this Marpy must be, because lots of different colors and interaction with the community. It's very cool, and I love the light of the daytime versus the nighttime effect. What a great thing. What about with rain? How do we deal with it if we have some rain?
So that's a great question. Of course, that's something that's always of concern. Some of the equipment is somewhat weatherproof. It's not going to help in a monsoon, or it could be tented somehow, but that's something we would have to figure out, or it would have to move to an alternate location, say one of our parking structures or garages where it would have more coverage.
Okay.
You know, odds are good in early October for us, but
Yeah.
Of course.
but you never know. But we have to plan everything with that in mind, that everything has to have a backup plan.
Exciting.
Just a sort of contextual thought. I love it. It's fantastic. I would mention, everyone might know this, no one might know this, 2020 is the year of biodiversity at the United Nations.
I didn't know that.
And member states, countries, are going to be gathering in October of 2020 to negotiate like the new international agreement around biodiversity in the context of climate change.
Wow.
And the Museum of the United Nations, admittedly with whom I work, so I'll step back from anything I say about it after this, but is doing programming around the world in cities around biodiversity and art. And so this is a separate thing. I think it's Code Art, but there will be a conversation going on about artistic representation of biodiversity, and then actually big negotiations in China in October too. So it's just a sort of energy into which this could plug.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Serendipity there.
We have our finger on the pulse this way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Just if everyone remembers, it debuted here.
Now, the location, you said is going to be by the fountain.
About 12 feet out from the seat that runs along the fountain
Okay.
is sort of what we mapped out.
Okay. How about where the digital egg was?
That site is actually not going to get as much visibility on the side, but we're glad that that site is freed up a little bit for people to circulate.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
So I like the concept, and I'm trying to be very open-minded. I am actually concerned that I don't know what they've done before, and I feel like this could go really beautifully, or it could really look tacky. And so I just was wondering, I don't know if there's a way to see like what other things have been. I was thinking about. Now I'm blanking on what it was called. In Menlo Park, they had that. The group, they did something very similar with the Team Lab. They did something similar where they had like Japanese flowers or something, and you could kind of interact with them. But that's my biggest concern. It looks cool. It seems like, but it's one of those things, have they done this before? Like, is this gonna be so,
Right.
that's just my concern.
Of course, and it's always a valid concern, especially when you're just looking at a conceptual proposal. Keep in mind that the selection panel that we pulled together was really looking at the artistic excellence, the resumes, the backgrounds, the work samples. So they felt very, very confident, as does staff, that MARPE has all the skill set and the right partners at the table to do this really tastefully and beautifully.
Any other comments or questions? All right, call the question. All those in favor?
I-
Oppose? Abstain? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next item is a non-action item is discussion of the regarding public art and private development. And I think this is something we've been trying to do for a while, and it's a good time now to do it as we go into the new year with a lot of new things coming online.
And we did print out we did print out a copy of this sort of little guideline sheet that we had put together several years ago when the program was initiated, about initial and final review by the Public Art Commission. There are more than 50 public art and private development programs within California alone. So a lot of the things that, we discuss about, in particular, accessibility, which I think was the main focal point of this discussion, is something that certainly cities with these programs have struggled with constantly and still do. A great example is San Francisco also has very limited open space, and so there were quite a few projects that were approved where the artwork was on the roof of the building, but you had to know that you could walk past the security guard to one specific elevator that has one small plaque to get up there. And there's still quite a few public parks. There was a recent article with those that, with the addresses, which I still kind of think would be fun to do the tour of. But accessibility is always an issue and a challenge. So I had asked Nadia to put together some images of some public art and private development that was more interior, more in lobbies. It's something that is quite common as long as the lobby space is accessible to the public a certain number of hours a day. And so we've got some eye candy for you because we are the public art program. We have to give you some eye candy. So as you'll see, many of these projects are in the lobbies in front of the security area. So you can see the turnstiles in the background and the security desk. But the advantage of having some of these indoors is you're not having a sculpture plopped outside the building, which you do see in some cities. And it can look, we call it the yard sale look, where you have that. Having something architecturally integrated allows it to be a little more seamless with the project. This is one by ESI Design, Nadia found, which is really interesting. So as you walk by, those all change and move. They follow you as you move through the space.
That's very cool.
Yeah. People's Time. So these were taken from all over the place, but I think mostly San Francisco area.
Yeah, and so I wanted to kind of provide examples of locally, regionally installed work, and also, countrywide, and a couple of international examples. So yes, for example, this is a kinetic piece. You can see that it's actually mechanically, it moves. So People's Time kind of celebrates celebrates modernization of time tracking. And another example, sort of a screen that provides both some privacy to the tenants and also aesthetically pleasing artwork. This is a local piece in San Mateo by Future Cities Lab. If you remember, they were the leading artists for the previous Code Art Festival.
Yeah.
Another local example, this is a LinkedIn building, so not everybody knows, but it's actually a publicly accessible lobby of a private company. The first floor, the lobby space features 6 artworks, including 3 large artworks by Frank Stella. I think just the 3 pieces by Stella are valued at $1 million. An example from San Jose.
And a word about this, it's the Price Waterhouse Coopers building, and it's on Almaden Boulevard, but it's on a part that is kind of isolated, because right next to it is the convention center. And then if you go south from there is Price Waterhouse Coopers. And nobody goes down that way, because once you come out, there's a parking structure at the convention center. Once you come out of there in that hotel, you go right to get to the downtown area. This is kind of isolated. The only reason I saw this is I drove by it many years ago, and I saw this Chihuly hanging there. I said, what is that? But that's an example, you know, of, but this, a lot of people probably don't even know that it's there, because it's just an isolated part of the downtown area that, you know, nobody really goes to or walks by, you know, but it's beautiful.
Absolutely. Another example by ECI Design, they sort of specialize in this reactive digital media pieces. So this is a continuous 590 square foot digital media installation that captures a life of Boston and the bay beyond it. Kind of celebrates it. This is a very interesting example. So this installation spans over 3 levels of this huge atrium.
Took me a minute.
In Johannesburg, in South Africa. So also publicly accessible, and it was very interesting to read about sort of the backstage challenges to install the piece on this scale.
I can only imagine.
Another local example, this is actually in Mountain View, California, just was recently installed. So it's an interactive piece. You can see there's a little kiosk that provides information about the piece and allows visitors to interact with the piece. So that would be
That's it.
just
Thank you, Nadia. But we just wanted to show some other examples of different types of work in lobby spaces. Clearly, there's some challenges with placing some of these outdoors, both from a materials standpoint and from just if these buildings are really high, being able to find an outdoor space that's suitable. And a lot of the new media work, of course, would be a challenge. So I think that's all we wanted to show, and we just wanted to open it up for conversation about the accessibility of the works in private development.
One comment is, for me, all of our public art is online, for the most part, correct? So if you did have someone who was interested, say Ben, driving by that building, wondering, what is that? And is that something accessible to me? And can I see that the next time around, or even now? People can actually go to our website and say, wow, they've got this Narduli right here in the lobby, and I can interact with that. And this lobby's open at least 40 hours a week, correct?
Correct.
So that's one benefit that we offer. I mean, it's not like we have a big sign outside saying, come in, see this piece of public art right here. But people can be aware and they can dig a little deeper if they'd like, right?
I agree with you, and I think, and this is where, I mean, I've seen most of these places.
Yeah.
But just driving by, but first of all, I don't think people think of Nerduli as public art. I have to be honest, and I know we do, but I have to say, I think a lot of, it just looks like a screen for a lot. I don't know if so that's one thing. So I mean, I think that's the one thing. I don't have number of statistics, but that like just in general, if I didn't, like I wouldn't think of it just in general as an art piece. Probably if I was on the commission, unless I was on the commission, I'm gonna be very honest with you.
No, that's good.
But the other thing I was gonna say that I think what really frustrates me and is that a lot of the art consultants that are asked to join the, I really don't think they think outside the box. And that, I think that's what's, to me, frustrating a little bit, because I feel like, we could say things, but they ultimately kind of have the final say. So I guess my question is, how can we get them to really push the boundaries? But I keep putting my insights, but I'm only one person. But I really feel like we are, some pieces are really nice, and I know it's cost factor, but I think it could be a little creative.
Can I ask, following up on what Nia just said, do the private companies hire, how do they find their consultants? Do they ever look to Palo Alto to recommend an art consultant? Because it seems typical that they do hire someone to help with this process.
We don't have a pre-approved list of consultants to recommend them to them. They can either contract with staff to do that, which we have done, like for the Barbara Gregutis and a few other projects, or they typically find their own art consultants. I think one of the things that may play into Commissioner Taylor's concerns are that, keep in mind, a lot of these projects are being built to have a broad appeal for unknown tenants. So by definition, they tend to want to commission things that are going to have a broader appeal, that are not going to be as edgy. So I think that's something you run into a lot in the private public art, and especially when projects are being built here, they don't know who's going to be in that space a lot of the time when they're designing it.
So I actually, to be honest, didn't think about that, but let me challenge you a little bit now. Is there a reason why we can't change that to say once the tenant moves in? Like, then the art, like, is there a, not law, but is there a, what's the word, not quote, but a clause saying that the art has to be installed before a tenant? Is there, because I don't, there might be in there, but I don't remember. I might not have looked at it that detailed, but
So-
that's, and could we, I guess the question is, could we change it? I mean, is that something that really, I'm just asking questions, because I think we get stuck, like, following laws and rules and things, and there's no need to have always those rules if you can change them, and it might make things a little bit nicer.
So it is in the ordinance that, and part of the reason we want it so early in the process is that as the building's being designed, that the artist gets on board so it's integrated, so you don't wind up with plop art. And so the artwork has to be approved by the Public Art Commission before they can pull their buildings permit. And the location for the artwork has to be reviewed at the time that they go through Architectural Review Board. So that there aren't any surprises at the very end where they've approved a building, say the Visa building was approved without any artwork on the outside, and then suddenly the LED artwork appeared on the outside. That would be really problematic for some of the other reviewing bodies who reviewed and approved that project. So all of those elements have to be reviewed in the planning stage.
And is that I mean, that's just not, I mean, it's not I guess my question is it common for even private who don't have to deal with the public art component? If they were to choose art for their buildings, would it be usually after, or does it depend? Do you know any statistics about?
Well, I think you're talking about two different things. So a percent for art and private development, generally there is an approval that has to take place way in advance of building completion. And if you're talking about two-dimensional art that's purchased later, that's not a requirement, then no, they have the right to hang whatever art they have
Right.
and select whatever art they would like to select. Assuming it's not offensive in some way.
I wonder, can we, I appreciate this and the examples, it's super helpful. And also, I think that we're obviously talking about a program that is compromised. By definition, if it's public, but it's only 40 hours a week, it's sort of not fully public, but at the same time, it's art that wouldn't exist if we didn't have the program, and so nothing should be in sort of pursuit of perfection here, and the example of having to produce the art before you have the tenants and then wanting the tenants to like it is a classic example of a complicated situation here.
Right.
And Lauren, the online thing, I totally get that, and that we should have that, and we do have that, but as an example, it probably wouldn't tell you whether you're within the 40 hours.
Right.
Whether this is accessible from 8 to 4 as opposed to 9 to 5, and those are the sorts of questions that I think can sort of get complicated and can make people feel like they don't have access to it, or it's inaccessible, or they don't even check. And so I wonder, and as a way back, I also looked into a lot of the ordinances because I was curious about the language that we have on the pieces, and whether there's, and found that, just to your point, at least like everyone's struggling to figure out how to make this accessible. Which means that, again, there can't be any perfect answer, one, and two, if we innovated, that would be great because it would be helpful to other cities too and look good for the program. So I'm curious about a couple things. The first of which is what happened with the San Francisco example. I didn't look at that one. What did they do to make people know that there was art on the rooftop, or nothing?
I don't believe there was much outreach for that, which is why then they moved down to lobbies and started working on these partnerships for these plazas, like pocket parks and things like that. But that's where it changed. So rooftop artwork, I believe, is no longer approved. One thing I was going to offer up, though, that could be a useful tool to help invite people in is the use of story as well, because the more stories we load, people pull up a map and it shows you what's nearby. So we could utilize that to make sure all the private development projects get on there. The other thing we've been talking to our IT department about, because we have, a Google map with public art, murals, public art and private development where they are, is they are updating the GIS system. And so they were talking to us about having all the public art plug in there, and we could have a lot more information. And there's no reason why we couldn't put the open hours in story and maybe in some of those descriptions. I think that's a great suggestion.
I think the question I'm thinking about, there's several things. I think a lot of times I get the idea of that art, that you don't know who the tenant is. But I will say that I think that art that is, and I'm not saying has to happen, but that art before a tenant goes in, it's like an afterthought a lot of times. And like this piece, I have to say, I mean, you're taking it, this is a big risk. I like it, but it's a huge risk. And so I guess my other thought is, I guess the whole idea we probably need to just think about is what is our goal, our vision for it? I mean, do we want people to really push the envelope and be a spot? Because I'm going to say it again. I don't think we're pushing. People are being pushed to like really think outside the box. I think we're playing it safe. And like the Greg Gudis is different, but at least you worked with that piece. And so I think you have the vision and you've seen a lot of other ideas, but I don't know if I really think people are playing it safe, and it's one of those things I think we have to really say, we really want to challenge you to think outside the box and think differently. But I mean, I don't know what you can't really do much if it's a lot of times. I think you have to be very careful, but I'm just a person, if you're going to do it, you should just go big or go home. That's one, to use that analogy. So
I'm glad that we have this ordinance in place, because if we didn't, then who knows what would go into these buildings, whatever people thought. So it's some guidance for it. And in some ways, I agree with you, Nia, that we want to encourage these people to have a really, really great piece of art in their building. But sometimes, as Elise was saying, the tenants that are going to come in, I know of one instance in San Jose that they put up a piece and the tenants didn't like it and they just voted it out and it was taken out. So, and it's hard to hit a moving target if you try to change what's going in there to please anybody. So I think the Gargudas piece, I think, is one of the really good examples that we have of this ordinance going into place. We can make suggestions, and really, that's all we can do, unfortunately. We can make suggestions, and they can follow them or not. It's like, it's their place, and they'll really basically do what they want to do, but we can give them some suggestions and maybe even some guidance about what to put in. You know, it's like if you bought a new place and somebody came in and told you what to put into the place, I don't think you'd like that. So, you know, that's, I think we're at that. I think if we've got a good start with this ordinance, and we can improve it as time goes on, especially as we get more and more of the private public art coming in, and the word spreads about it, then I think we can get more pieces that are going to be really impactful. And I think we have a lot right now. But as like Lisa was saying, we don't want plop art. We don't want anything that looks like it was an afterthought. Somebody walked by and stuck something up on the wall and said, we got art now.
Can I ask you that, Ben, so the piece that you were just referring to, that they, deaccession, so to speak, was that private, public art and private development?
That was actually a public piece that was going in an apartment building and some niches that were outside. And they were going to put murals, I believe, in those little niches. And the tenants that had already bought places looked at that and they didn't like it, and there was an uproar, and they took them out.
Well, so I guess that's where I'm feeling that, like, yes, it's nice to
But
have
that
these.
was public art, it wasn't private. That was a piece of public art that was going in that was financed by the city.
I know, but I guess I'm feeling like the private, I feel like it's a lot of the same, where we're going into the same issue, where it's like after,
No,
it's set off
it's really
the
not,
stop sign
because
one
they
way.
own the building. We can't do anything about that. They're going to do whatever they want to do. And we can make suggestions. And maybe it's at times strong suggestions, but we can make suggestions of what to do in that building.
And so I guess the tenant just has to deal with it, essentially.
Well,
is
you
what
know,
it's-
our hands are tied in some ways. And unfortunately, that's the case right now, because it's private development. Now, if it was like the city, like the parking garage, that'd be a different story.
And also, I know there are times when we strongly encourage the in lieu. And we can, there just doesn't seem to be an appropriate place, and the builder, developer is really not interested in art, and what we can say is, wow, we can really use these funds to enhance public art elsewhere. And we're lucky when that happens.
I wonder, it's helpful to think about what we can do in the way in which the commission, as this lays out, sort of, it can have influence, but as Ben says, is limited. And then, Ben, you also mentioned the ordinance, which really is what guides us, and the notion of improving it too over time as the program builds. And that's a totally separate thing, I would assume, in terms of process, and not one that
Right.
we would be actively engaged in, or, we might, stand up and say something at a city council meeting, but not something that we did as voting members of this commission. But I wonder, then, in the first space, leaving aside the question of changing, improving, adapting, evolving the ordinance, if there aren't, and this is just some questions about whether or not we present, and the folks who come to us with options, for instance, some that could be stronger in terms of signage than what they do, and some that is just like now, and they're aware that there's a sort of range of ways to do signage, or even outreach that the private development could do to public institutions like schools, to know that it's there, and that be part of what they do to do the development. That's a question of ways in which they could choose to amplify what they've done, but would also make it feel more accessible. I'd be curious to look at options around that we can present to people that we were engaged, that were coming here. One, two, I'm sort of, and this is a little outside the box, but public art does many things. We could think about some of these in which no one but the people who work in the buildings are going to see, and we could hope that it encourages them to make ethical and creative and equitable and just decisions when they're going about their day. But also, if it's going into a place that people are unlikely to see or less likely to see than, say, another site, the way in which public art can be served, it would seem to me by working with local artists, and encouraging that. And so rather than it being, say, accessible to everyone, because I get there are limitations there, are there ways in which we could, this is in sort of line with Nia's question about the consultants, that the consultants know that we care, from where the artists are coming.
Okay.
I would be curious. And again, this is dangerous because we can't tell them what to do, one, and if the art world is global by definition, intentionally so, and we sort of don't want to do that. And the couple that I've seen while I've been on the commission have had local influence. And so I think this is already something that comes naturally to a lot of people. And I know Ben has many more examples that probably bear that out. But I would be curious to think about, that's another way in which I feel like we could influence the development that served the residents of Palo Alto and the art scene here, so to speak, and that which art facilitates.
I think by nature, quite a few of these projects have had somewhat limited budgets, and so for that reason, in particular, they've gravitated toward more local artists. So I'm trying to think, are there any sort of East Coast artists? It seems like it's been mostly California, Barbara Gregoris's Arizona, and then up north, like Seattle-based artists. So that's sort of happened naturally. And I also just wanted to follow up on something Commissioner Taylor said earlier about, Barbara Gregoris. I would love to take credit for the fact that Sandhill Property Company, supported and really wanted to go with that project. But if you look at those buildings, you can see that it was the owner developer who really wanted something noticeable, and that's something that they've done. So I would love to take credit for that, but I really can't.
That's true.
Because
It's funny
we-
because it's the ironic, the group that we just saw, with their piece, I felt like they really just wanted it. They didn't want anybody to really notice it. It was kind of like they wanted it to keep, and so it is true. It's really, it's a hard thing, and that's why, I hate being I have to push them because I know you can't, but it's how can we?
But it's the developer's aesthetic, so that work was more in keeping with their building and their architecture and sort of what the vibe they're trying to build, I guess you would say.
And those areas that you mentioned, Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, are all big public art places. So, and artists gravitate to those areas where they know there's going to be work, and it's a welcoming atmosphere for public art. And when I go past a building like this Cholula or some other place and I see something in the lobby, I'll go in. And, they'll say you have to leave. And I say, okay. The only thing, I only say no. Right? So, if I see something in a building, I always go in and just take a look at it. And I'll ask, can I come in and look at the art? And usually it'll be yes. So.
And we do have uniform signage so that hopefully as more projects get developed, it'll become more recognizable to people. And, lately we've been encouraging the signage to come a little further out so that it's more visible, say from the sidewalk, as opposed to having to walk across the artwork to the opening of a building you wouldn't go to normally to see the plaque and know that it's actually public art. So we have been trying to address those. It's a bit of a learning curve as we go.
And that happens in consultation with staff and the designers and the artists and the consultants, sort of in an iterative fashion. They say, this is where we think we're going to put the signage.
That's correct. And actually, when a project comes before the Public Art Commission, they have to show where the signage is going. And that final artwork and the signage placement is what gets written in their covenant agreement, and that's what I use when I go to do the site inspection before they can pull their certificate of occupancy. So that is also another stopgap where the commission may be able to give that kind of feedback.
That's good.
The other thing I wanted to say, I often wonder too, what other marketing things that we could do kind of to promote our collection in general, but I know it's a little pricey, but like a bus ad or something, or some street banners or something, but basically say some fun fact or something, and have pieces of public art, I'm like, can you find me, kind of thing. But is that a
Scavenger
way?
Scavenger hunt.
A scavenger or something, just,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if we could even do something in like the paper, where we do like an ad or something with like, can you find all these places, or if you find them and write the location, like, you bring it in and you get a free something, but maybe just a way to, just to publicize it in a more.
You know, and I think that's the $64,000 question, is how do you get public art into the public? It's called public art, but very few in the public know about the art, so how do we get that out? And I think NIA is thinking about that, and how do we get this out there? Because there are some really, really good pieces that need to be viewed and be seen, but, you know, how do you get people out to the golf course to see Birdie? You know, stuff like that, so. Any other comments or questions? Now, this is a really, it's a discussion that needs to be held every once in a while, I think, about public art and private development, especially because of just the nature of it. I know, and I want to do the same thing. I just want to say, you know, it really needs something strong in there, but it's their building. And I think somebody already mentioned it, that one building where they were going to place the art in the lobby, and then ended up on the roof someplace, back in the corner where you're in the dark, where you couldn't see it. So, you know, it and stuff. I think that's the only really, I don't know if it's a failure, but that we've had in this, in the private development part of it. No.
One other question, is there, apologies if this is in there, but like a tax break kind of thing that people, if they do in lieu, like it's a better deal, kind of, that we can kind of, I don't know if you can say it that way, but like.
No,
is
to
that-
incentivize the in lieu. You know, that was something that was actually discussed with council when this ordinance was adopted, and they decided it didn't make sense to incentivize one over the other, that keep it a straight 1% on either of those. But another way to look at that is because the maintenance is the obligation of the building owner, in some ways it incentivizes the in lieu because they don't have the ongoing financial obligation to maintain it.
I think that, Nia and Ben, your points about the information, how this question overlaps with the question of making public art known and seen is an interesting one, and I think it brings some clarity to the question, because this is a problem of, in part, information, as is all public art, getting people to know that where it is and to go see it, but then it's also something else, which is there's a question of architecture and visibility and accessibility and equity that you don't have if you just put a thing in a park. And so I'm glad we got this on the agenda today. Thank you. And I'd like to continue the conversation just as a conversation, because we don't have anything concrete here, obviously. But thinking about the pressure points that we do have, or options that can be presented, if only to the developers that want to do something, and I don't mean stylistically in terms of art, but I mean in terms of information sharing to make people know that they can come see it, those who really want it to be seen, as opposed to those who might be doing what they're required to do, but don't necessarily want a lot of street traffic. Some might actually want it, and might be willing to do a little bit more.
Now, you know, when I,
Oh,
go
sorry.
go ahead.
I
Go
was
ahead.
just gonna say off of what not Ben, sorry, what
Ian.
thank you, brain freeze, said, can we find out their goal? Like, I think we haven't asked, I don't think ever, like, what's your goal? What's your vision, kind of? And I'm wondering if that kind of goes off with what you said, but like, find out, like, what are they hoping? You know, why did they choose to not to do in lieu and to do, to find a piece of art, and what are they, so we get a better idea rather than them just showing us, okay, these are the pieces or the artists we like, and that's it, kind of thing. Sorry, Ben.
No, it's, and unfortunately, sometimes for the developers, just checking off a box and getting it done. That's, you know, that's, That's the problem there. When I started in public art almost 30 years ago, we were just getting to the end of what public art was statues. You put up a statue for everything. But now it's gotten more and more into the pieces that we have now that are just very thoughtful, reflect the community. A lot of the artists will do community input for their pieces. And it's just an evolving field, and we've gotten to this point, and we can carry it a little bit further on as we go. And with the private development, one part of that evolution of public art from statues to what we have now, to the Gargudas piece, for example. Any other questions or comments? All right, I think we have a drink waiting for us. Okay, any announcements? And the next meeting will be January 16th. So everyone, have Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And where are we meeting?
We are meeting at Gravity.
Okay. All right, thank you all for attending tonight. I know it's just less than a week from Christmas. Time is precious to all of us, and thank you all for coming. It was a good discussion tonight. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last meeting of 20